Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for novices and masters alike. I am here with my fellow master, Josh, the line developer for the Earthdawn 4th edition. And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things... heck with it. We're done. And
finally killed it. All things sorial.
All things sorial and all things quizzical, because we have questions emailed to us. So we'll actually handle some email first. So Josh, feel free to say hi, because I've cut you off now twice.
That's okay. Hello, everyone.
But since we have email, that always reminds us to tell y'all, the rest of you, if you'd like us to answer your questions, or mostly Josh to answer your questions, please email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. If you put them on the forums, Josh will get you directly. If you email them to us, maybe we can both answer you. But otherwise, Twitter's not good for both of us to get.
Twitter's good for me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the Facebook, the Earthdawn Guild group on Facebook. If you aren't part of that, you really should be. It's actually a pretty good group of people. Obviously, we've got the Facet Games Discord channel, and we've got the forums at our website. I mean, a bunch of ways you can get a hold of me. So. Yeah,
exactly. But really, us, come on, us, podcast. Here we go.
And not just y'all, but all y'all, to use the proper plural.
Proper slang. But we're going to get to some emails first, and then after that, we're going to talk about T'Skrang.
Yes.
In depth, like we did for Windlings and so forth. So this first email comes, I think, from Stee, S-T-E. I don't know if it was Steve and cut off, but anyway. Hi, guys. I've heard a few references on your podcast to immortal elves behind Thera. I admit I missed this in the background and don't recall it from the first edition products. Is this canon?
Yes, it is canon. This is not something that you would necessarily pick up on just the first edition products on their own. This is something that really is an extrapolation of the extended interaction between Earthdawn and Shadowrun from the 90s and the development that was going on at that time. Mm-hmm. With Shadowrun, with Earthdawn being established as the previous high age of magic for Shadowrun, the previous cycle of magic, and having been established even before Earthdawn came out, that there were characters in Shadowrun, specifically elves, not to mention the dragons, but that there were elves specifically who had existed in the previous age of magic. Most notable of them being Harlequin and Aaron the Scribe, who featured in the first edition, maybe first edition, might have been early second edition Shadowrun adventure Harlequin, which basically is a bunch of connected mini adventures that involve a advanced, funky kind of duel between ancient immortals and the discovery, sort of the reveal at the end that they have a whole lot of more power than anything seemed to be revealed before. Also, along with some of the novels, I'm thinking specifically of the original Shadowrun Secrets of Power trilogy, but the other Robert Charette novel, which I believe was Never Trust an Elf, I think was the name of it. But that one involved a lot of like ancient elf magic and stuff as well. But that basically understanding that and looking at some of the things that it basically shows up. You know, some of the references in Shadowrun to things that then sort of get alluded to or appear in Earthdawn and whatnot. Most obviously, when you're talking about immortal elves, is Aethne Oakforest, actually, who was a prominent individual in the Tir Tairngire in Shadowrun, and appears with the same name in the Bloodwood sourcebook, that he's one of the high-ranking people in Bloodwood. So it's one of those things that is there if you look for it, but is one of the sort of like obvious secrets or open secrets to people who have done a little bit of looking into that. But it is easy to miss. Earthdawn has a couple of references, like passing references to like great elves or something that they talk about, like elves that are like even more longer lived than normal and stuff like that. But yeah, it's certainly possible to have missed it, and it requires, like, to pick up on it requires like doing a lot of cross-referencing between material from different lines and not published in official source books discussions from Lou and various other writers and developers over the years. I don't know how easy it is to find these days. There used to be a website, Ancient History, was the guy who managed it. That was the handle he went by, that like coordinated and collated a lot of the like Shadowrun references to Earthdawn and stuff like that. I think it's available in the Wayback Machine if you
Josh just spilled the beans.
Dig for it.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things that's there if you look for it, but if you hadn't been aware of it before, don't feel bad. We will have to pencil in an episode where we really dive deep into the immortal elves and dragons and what is known and what is speculated and a lot of what's going on there. But that's like deep lore stuff that I think is probably like a few months down the line.
If not next year. And he also goes on to add, it would be certainly adding another dimension to the friction between Thera and the Great Dragons. And he will therefore be setting his game in the first edition timeline so that Thera remains a key player in his province.
Yes. And that's fine. Yes, absolutely. Part of the, so there's like, when you're talking about the sort of the default Earthdawn setting, you've got basically like three kind of points of a power triangle that are going on. You've got the Great Dragons and you've got Thera, and part of the struggle going on between the dragons and Thera is that the secret, powerful, ancient, immortal elf masters behind Thera and the dragons have this thing going on, but nobody else really knows about it. But also remember that Thera was founded by an exile from the Bloodwood, which also has its own immortal elves. And so there's that struggle as well, which is why Alakia didn't like the Theran protections and why she made the decision that she did with the Bloodwood. Like, I mean, there's all sorts of like deep
soap
stuff
opera
that's going on there. Yeah.
And these are the days of our lives in Thrall.
And so, yes, it is, but understand that the number of actual immortals is relatively small when you're talking about the actual populations of these areas. Totally. And so while there may be half a dozen immortals that are sort of secretly behind the founding of Thera or whatever and know the truth, and the reason they founded it has to do with that, they don't really have the ability to control what the thousands of citizens of Thera do, and the actual like front-facing leaders like the first governor and the commanders and the leaders of the various houses and stuff like that. So their ability to dictate what Thera does, like the people ostensibly in the way that I see it is that the people ostensibly in charge of Thera publicly do not necessarily know the truth behind everything, and so will go and do their own thing regardless. And so they would have potentially bought into the myth of Thera's founding as much, if not more so, than other people who are aware of it. Like, when we were talking about Barsave and whatnot. So yeah, like there's a lot of like ancient deep drama, and why the same kind of stuff happens over and over again and whatnot. So, yeah.
Thank you, Steve, for opening that Pandora's box.
Thank you.
This is deep lore knowledge for you, and Josh just
like that's like you creaked open Pandora's box a little bit, and like there's this big shiny bright whatever, and you're just gonna, oh yeah, well we'll close that and we'll come back to that another time.
That, and that's like a 2-hour deep podcast later, much later. Okay, so second email, however, has like 19 questions on it, so we'll get to these in turn as fast as we possibly can. This is from Joel,
from
British
Joel.
I will not try and butcher your accent. I'm just going to butcher it right off the bat. So if you want to hear me speak in a bad British accent, join a different podcast. Don't do that. Guys, first, great podcast, guys. Really loving what you're doing. Secondly, I've been playing Earthdawn since the 90s, and 4th edition is the best edition ever. Josh, take your bow.
Thank you.
He applauds you.
I appreciate that. I am not the sole one responsible for that, but I, on behalf of the team, will accept your appreciation.
And
thank you.
Go all around the next meeting. So, first question. Any thoughts on resizing of magic items? Some items call it out in their description, but can, in your minds, a weaponsmith resize a set of thread armor party have found to fit an over or undersized party member?
Sure.
Easy.
Why not?
Done.
Yeah. there are enough examples in officially published material of items that have gone through modification to one extent or another, and some of which even require deeds for you to do that in order to unlock further powers for them. And so I don't think that there is anything necessarily wrong with having weaponsmiths be able to modify magic items even without necessarily affecting what they can do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, absolutely. The extent to which you do that and allow that is up to you. And no, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, for that to be done.
You find troll size armor. It's a threat item somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it might be, depending on obviously you're going to have a really, really hard time, I think, justifying, you found this, this threaded chain armor for, sized for a troll, and our windling wants to use it. You're probably going to run into some issues.
Yeah, a little bit.
But, I mean, and that's even setting aside why didn't you just have the item be the size that it needed to be for your person?
Because that's not the legend that always goes along with it.
When you create it.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it was an orc hero if you find something in Carafad.
Yeah. That is all absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I don't usually have a major problem with it, considering I find orcs, humans, to Scrang, and elves to be generally about the same size.
Yeah, close enough that you absolutely, making the modifications on that. I mean, even within a single name giver species, you've got an incredible range of sizes that you could have. Yes. And so, this was originally a suit of armor that was worn by a 6'8", 320-pound human warrior, and now our warrior, who's 5'10" and a lot sort of leaner, wants to use it. Well, we'll take it in a little bit.
That can happen.
But those sorts of modifications would not, certainly wouldn't want to, unless it was like the point of the story, would not want to have those kind of modifications done by somebody to actually damage the item's abilities, and would potentially down the road even come into play in terms of the item's legend and the key knowledges required in order to unlock its power in the future.
Question number 2. Why are there no bluff talents? Or should I just be using the existing social talents as appropriate for the situation?
You should be using the available social talents as appropriate. This opens up a big can of worms with regards to rules for social interactions and social talents and things like that. The rules for interaction tests have existed since first edition. They have never really been particularly integrated into the talent progression for the disciplines, even for disciplines that are ostensibly suited to it, like troubadours or thieves or illusionists, if you're talking about deception, that sort of thing. Generally, so I don't know. There's like a whole, I was actually reading a discussion online today about social, quote unquote, social combat rules and the difficulty of them, and but some people don't want to make rolls. They just want to role play it. And there's that's a whole episode on its own.
Agreed.
Generally speaking, when appropriate, there are talents that could probably do it. And you could substitute conversation, to potentially do, deception checks and things like that. That is one of those areas, the social interaction rules would be probably one of the areas that I would be most interested in completely ripping out and rebuilding from scratch and integrating it more with the skill and talent system. Sure. But again, how much value would that actually be for people who don't want to use that sort of thing and instead would just kind of role play out most of it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have read a lot of discussion on the theory behind social rules and various takes on it, and depending on my mood is how I might approach it at any given time.
I generally do.
Yeah.
I boil it down to something really simple. So if I can help out Joel real quick, because Josh is, I can't say on the fence, but he's got a lot he wants to do with the social construct rules. So a quick little down and dirty thing that I do, if this helps at all, anybody, is I have that person ROLE play it. So role play it. And when you role play it, if the player does a good enough job, I give them a +2 or a +4 or whatever the case may be. So the better you sell it in person around the table, the higher bonus I will give you to accomplish your task of bluffing the other player. Right. And then you get to roll your dice. And if you defeat their social defense, you've bluffed them. That's it. So I do it down and dirty.
to illustrate the problem with this, however, is that benefits players, mind you, not necessarily characters, but it benefits players who are more glib and quick thinking and able to speak extemporaneously and well to do that.
Oh, I don't give them a time frame. If they want to write it down and read it off a script, great.
Yeah, so you like, but that's one of the points of argument is you don't require somebody who plays a warrior to be able to physically do the things that the warrior is doing. When it comes to social interactions, why is it that we require so much to then rely on the player capability as opposed to the numbers that are there on the character sheet, right?
Because we're not on the SCA and we are doing a social activity.
Yeah. Why is it that like you can play basically at that point, well then, if you are relying more on the actual like role playing at the table, why do you allow somebody essentially to take charisma as a quote unquote dump stat because they have the ability as a performer or actor or whatever to overcome that through their own natural abilities? And I completely understand that argument. And I don't know that there's necessarily an easy solution, and it depends on the table and all sorts of other factors.
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
so when I'm like hemming and hawing and like that is sort of one of the foundations of the debate that has raged in gaming design for 35 years. We're not going to solve it here tonight.
No, agreed. It's because around my table, I have equal amounts of extroverts and introverts. And so the introverts don't want to do that. They will, okay, fine. I say these words. Do I bluff? Roll your dice. No bonus, whatever.
Yeah.
The other person will absolutely act that out. Okay, fine. Here's a +2. Here's a +4, whatever, and go from there. So if it helps, great.
It goes along with the same kind of thinking of, well, do you give people legend awards for role playing? Well, again, at that point, you're rewarding people for something that they are naturally good at doing compared to others. Again, no easy answer, but yeah. So that's the interaction test rules. I think are pretty decent if you use them. And I have pushed to, like, especially if you look at the Legends of Barsave Adventures, there's a lot of places where I have worked in illustrations of, like, basically the way to get information out of something is to treat everything in terms of social interactions, especially if you're like interrogating or whatever, as a favor level, and using the talents to manipulate using your talents like first impression or stuff like that to manipulate the
favorability rating,
the relationship level between the player character and the NPC to determine how easy it is. And then having things like, oh, well, then you give them money to bribe them. And that does this to provide a bonus to the test and things like that, to provide some kind of mechanical structure as an example of, okay, this is information. This is something you are trying to achieve through a social interaction. Here is the objective that you need to reach. Yeah.
Look, worms out of a can.
I hope that, I hope that, I don't know that I actually answered the question, but yeah, there's not a lot of direct integration between the existing skill and talent system and the interaction tests. And depending on my mood, that is either a good thing or a bad thing.
Actually, the first part you did answer, which is use the existing social talents as they are. And Josh will rewrite those rules on his deathbed for like 6th edition. So when he gets around to it. So question number 3, more combat oriented stuff. Why is Crushing Blow better than Downstrike? They both cost a strain. They'll both replace your strength in your damage, but Downstrike has requirements. So it seems Crushing Blow is just outright better, particularly once it is combined with the warrior's large amounts of attacks. particularly to Scrang.
Yeah. I don't have a great answer for this. My initial thought when I read this question was, well, Downstrike is a novice tier talent and Crushing Blow is a journeyman talent, which is not, it turns out, actually the case when I went and looked at the breakdown. Okay. Downstrike, basically, nobody gets access to both Downstrike and Crushing Blow, as I seem to recall, having looked at the list recently, but they do both kind of show up in the journeyman tier. I think this is a legacy a little bit from first edition, where Downstrike did show up earlier as a novice tier, like I think it was 4th circle for Warrior, and Crushing Blow was like 8th, 7th, or 8th circle for Sky Raider. So there was a very notable like power differential between them, and it made sense that Downstrike, while the effective both of them is to increase the effective damage step. Downstrike was available at a lower circle and so had some requirements before it could come into play, whereas Crushing Blow didn't. I think over the course of development through 3rd edition and into 4th edition, the differential in terms of when they became available shrank a little bit. And now it's largely like they sort of do the same thing, but yes, Downstrike has a restriction, and that's largely just a matter of who is it that have abilities or has an ability that will be able to take advantage of Downstrike in a way that others don't. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at it purely in terms of like, those numbers, Crushing Blow is better because it will come into play more often, because basically you can use it on any attack, whereas Downstrike only comes into play when you are in the situation that it can be triggered.
You're literally vertically above your opponent, yeah.
And I don't have a good answer for that. It's because, legacy development stuff and the shifts over the years, and, one of those things that's like, yeah.
Is everything perfect? No, but
I mean, again, like it's not available to everybody. It's not available to the same people. Downstrike is, like shows up at basically the same time as Crushing Blow now for the most part. Just Warrior gets Crushing Blow. Nobody else gets it as a discipline talent. It's optional for Weaponsmith at Master tier, so it's even higher circle. Downstrike is the same circle, 7th circle for Beastmaster and Sky Raider, both of whom get Great Leap.
Yes, they should be
basically so that so they should be able to use it fairly frequently. But yeah, I don't disagree that based on where they get them now, they probably are not as significant a difference. So,
but nobody gets both, right?
But nobody gets both. No, I don't believe so. Without like diving into it too deeply. No, because the only people that get Crushing Blow are Warrior and Weaponsmith, at least according to the matrix I'm looking at here. And Warrior and Weaponsmith do not get Downstrike at any point. So I think it's largely a flavor thing.
That's fine. And I am fine with that, because I think to his point, since we can say nobody gets both, then one is more appropriate for that discipline's flavor than this discipline over here. And that works for me. And
maybe making it available a little bit earlier would be better, but then what are you swapping out? And there's a whole lot of without going and diving into things in depth for a lot, I couldn't say. Okay.
So related to that one, because he has a question number 4, and he knows the combat classes are disciplines, not classes, are supposed to be better in fights. How do we feel that other classes can be helped to feel more than window dressing in a fight? This could be ideas for encounter design and staging. He finds starting at range helps a lot, which is an old D&D thing, your range attacks go first. But also, what about spells that provide a bonus attack option for spellcasters? Doesn't initiative, Josh, solve a lot of this?
Well, so first off, I think that there is an assumption here that you run into a lot.
Well, he says,
and that is that and I'm not even necessarily like saying that he, but I think that the question itself is kind of predicated on this assumption that everybody needs to be able to contribute in combat equally. And I don't think that's the case. I don't agree with that as a premise.
I agree with you entirely.
And so if somebody wants to be a character that contributes more obviously in combat the way that a warrior or swordmaster or sky raider does, they should play a warrior or a swordmaster or a sky raider.
Yes.
We talked about this sort of going back to the wizard. And talking about spellcasters in general, is that if you are going to be playing a spellcaster, and the way that we have generally designed spellcasters in 4th edition is that they are not like blasty combat damage monsters for the most part. They have damage spells. Some of them have fairly impressive damage spells once you get into higher circles. But that the idea that the only way for a character to be worthwhile is to be able to contribute in combat. What that says to me, and that may not necessarily be the case for Joel's group and or the situation that he's talking about here, but it strikes me as a situation where you are having a lot of combats and not having other types of challenges and encounters where those other kinds of characters can shine in their chosen path.
Because he says,
like a troubadour, if you have a group that is not going to be dealing with any kind of like social interaction, politicking, dealing with whatnot, and is just going to be going like, is just going to be going from one combat encounter to another, a troubadour is not going to be particularly happy there. Right. And I don't think that it makes any sense to dilute the troubadour's social prowess by giving them combat ability so that they can feel like they are contributing in a situation that they are not designed to contribute in.
Agreed. Let every character
and so
let every character shine a little bit throughout the entire adventure, so that way everybody gets their own little spotlight.
Yeah, that's a. And again, I'm not saying that Joel is necessarily making that argument, but those arguments tend to come from a place of, I feel frequently come from a place of, I don't feel like I am contributing enough in combat. I'm not doing enough damage, or I'm not whatever. Like, I'm a spellcaster. I have to spend a round weaving and then I cast a spell. During those 2 rounds, the warrior, hits the target 5 times and kills 3 opponents. Yeah. Right. You've maybe got to understand a little bit what your character's métier is.
That's a $10 word.
Well, that's a foreign word. And I'm not even sure I used that correctly. But like, just recognizing that, and if you've got a player, if you're a GM and you've got a player that is expressing those kinds of frustrations, maybe that's an indication that you need to change up some of your adventure design and present them with scenes and situations where their expertise can be the focus and can shine.
Yeah. His qualifying statement was multiple attacks and a much higher initiative is making his spellcasters feel impotent, like hold threads.
Yeah. And again, you get a high circle warrior with air dance, tiger spring, things like that. They're going to be acting relatively quickly in the combat. They will have multiple attacks potentially, especially if you're getting into the point where they've got second attack or second weapon, bonus attack from air dance if they're rolling higher enough. Especially once you start getting into like warden circles and stuff where they've got, we'll have even more of that. And the magicians absolutely in that action economy can get left in the dust. I can recognize that as a situation. I do not think, however, that the solution to that is to give that same stuff to magicians.
Or
I don't know what the solution necessarily, or other characters. Yeah. I don't necessarily know offhand what the solution is. I don't think it's a solution that you can mechanically create without changing all sorts of other things about how stuff works.
Well, and also at maybe to your point, the warden circles, your spellcasters should also be more effective in a lot of other areas. They might be able to buff your fighters. That's something that they could do automatically to help the combat, quote unquote, and so that they feel like they're actually doing something. They can maybe be able to affect the environment with some other certain spells, not necessarily just do damage to the target.
Sure, it is not a problem that is exclusive to Earthdawn. Like you see this kind of problem in Dungeons and Dragons, when you get the combat types getting up to multiple attacks per round and, whatnot. I think maybe a potential solution to that is some additional spells, maybe area effect type things.
Yeah.
Control, like battlefield control and things like that for spellcasters. Again, the reasons that people might feel this way are varied and whatnot. I don't really necessarily agree with the underlying premise that goes along with those questions and go from there.
Okay. Question 5. What modifiers apply and when do they apply? Does Inspire Others buff everything as it seems to read? And does being harried affect damage and effect tests?
This comes up all the time.
Yeah.
On the Discord. So it basically, I don't care how you do it as long as you are consistent. Basically, is what it comes down to for me.
No, I'm okay with that.
And this is a question that potentially goes back to, goes all the way back to first edition in terms of the harried penalty and things like that. What does it apply to? Are damage tests action tests? Or are they effect tests? Are those different? There's a lot of not clearly defined terms. And so generally speaking, my only thing would be to say, decide what you think works for you and consistently apply it at your table. That kind of feels like a cop-out, but
it just makes the most sense.
This is a discussion that comes up fairly often and everybody has different takes on it. Whatever you agree with at your table is fine and go from there. I generally apply to, as I'm reading, actually Inspire Others here right now. It's high social defense, +1. If successful, all affected characters add +1 to social defense and gain a +2 bonus to their tests for each success. Yeah. It just says to their tests. Generally speaking, I have always been of the opinion that that unless it specifically says a specific kind of test, for example, Monstrous Mantle provides +2 to attack and damage tests, close combat attack and damage tests, that when it says test, it refers to everything. That's just the way that I interpret it because it's easier. Other people have different interpretations, and that's fine as long as you are consistent at the table. Morgan will probably be upset with me if his interpretation is different, but whatever.
Well,
I don't,
blank space
I
on
don't
the page,
think
you can make your own little note.
Yeah.
I did in pencil. This is what this rule means at my table. Cool.
Yeah.
Also, what is a super secret project? Josh, he wants to know.
Well, the super secret project. I see what you did there. Yeah. Nice try.
Because
we will be at some point announcing the super secret project, but we are not going to be doing it on this podcast tonight.
By we, Josh means him, because even I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
He hasn't even told me. I have no secret information. I have nothing.
Yeah. So yeah. Nice trying to sneak that in there at the very end of question 5.
So, because he's got more questions. It was in the middle, the gooey sandwich filling of the Oreo cookie. So he didn't. No, sorry, dude. We're not going to swallow that. We're not taking that bite. Or Josh isn't, because I don't know anything.
It will be announced. It will be announced at some point. And we will probably tease when it is going to be announced.
Ooh, look at us.
But that is all that I will say on that right now.
Question 6. What thing from earlier editions do you each want to bring back? And which do you want to never come back? He'd like familiar spirits back. You've already got rid of most of my nevers, infinite talents that replace your main attack talent, so forth and so on. So
yeah, we talked about that in a previous episode. Familiars are slated to be included in the next Magic source book.
There you go.
So that is already on the radar as something to be done.
You're welcome.
So there's that.
Well, I'll tell you what. While Josh thinks about his answer, the thing I'd like back from earlier editions, honestly, is I miss the treasure cards that came out. Not that they were the most useful thing ever, because you had to write really, really small to put all your all your questions and answers on the back of those.
Those were certainly an interesting idea.
I like that idea. They could actually make them quarter page or even half a page, or since now we're in digest size, 1 page each for those. Not necessarily make them a color plates, but they could do that.
Yeah, the difficulty, the difficulty that you have with those as something that would be included in the book is that increases the binding costs and stuff like that.
Perforation of the pages and so forth. So yeah.
Yeah, because it's a different material and things like that.
That's what I'd like to see back.
I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know. Nothing immediately comes to mind like that has not.
Well, you're the line developer, so if you wanted it there, you'd already brought it over.
Well, I mean, there's some stuff that like familiars, for example, that we like. I would have liked to have seen back sooner, but has not had a space or actually even really particular rules that we were necessarily happy with. I would at some point like to see, rules for airship and riverboat stuff to come back. Yeah. It's a matter of finding a place for it and hammering it into a shape that I'm happy with. Because as I've mentioned before, I'm not a super hardcore, like range and number crunchy tactical combat type of person. And I want to have, maybe have the rules allow that level of things. I also want it to work so that it can be handled relatively easily, for people who want to do that. But, I'd like to see those come out eventually in some form. I don't know exactly when or what form that will be. It is sort of in the folder and aware of being there, and at some point we'll be able to focus attention on it, but we've got other stuff we're working on right now.
Will we see more paths in later books? Any plans for the Adept journey to become a series after Mystic Paths?
Where appropriate, yes, we will probably see more paths in the future, because that structure seems to work really, really well for some stuff, rather than coming up with an entirely new discipline. Certainly, if we don't do it, like the path structure works really, really well potentially for light bearers, if we ever decide to bring them back. But any kind of like secret society or whatever, I think it's a decent framework. Any plans for like the Adept's journey to be a series? If we can come up with enough of them to fill another book, sure. There are no specific plans right now in development for another Paths book, or like another Adept's journey type book. But if there is a path that is appropriate for a setting location, it might be included in that. The difficulty of coming up with anything like that is coming up with the new, like, rules and talents and knacks and everything that go along with those. Yeah. So that can be a difficult, like, that takes quite a bit of development cycles and hammering and playtesting and things like that. So yeah, if we can come up with enough of them for another book, we probably will do another book. More likely, they will show up as like secret societies or something that are focused in a particular area. As opposed to just having like tied to a particular setting. Yeah. So,
and return question for you, Joel: would you buy it? Because that's kind of the thing.
Oh, I'm sure he would.
Because I'm
sure he would.
I would too, because I buy everything Earthdawn puts out. So, last questions: any plans for publishing the named horrors? And will I get in trouble when my party kills Joey? Yes, you will get in trouble. No, you won't. I'm just kidding.
No, you won't get in trouble. I mean, anyway. So. Any plans? Yes, in the vague sense that I would really like to see 4th edition stat blocks for them actually be released. There were, I think, like worked up initially as part of the development work on the companion. And for various reasons, they were originally planned to be in there, but the space was not available. I think one of the things so we need to, I don't just want to say, okay, here is the 4th edition version of all the named horrors with the reprint. Like, I don't want a new horrors book to just basically be a reprint of all the stuff. We would want to have new material that goes along with it. I think one of the things that would really work well with that conceptually, if I'm spitballing right now, is to try and address advice really for game masters to handle like masterminds and campaign level opponents and stuff like that. Which could apply not only to horrors, but also potentially to great dragons and other powerful beings like that. I think that some looking at how to handle single quote unquote boss level opponents to face a group of adepts requires actually a little bit of a different mechanical approach as things are right now, because a group of adepts with all of their powers tuned and whatnot, can like rapidly carve through a single opponent. And people who probably have been playing in 4th edition for a little bit may have encountered this, is that the critters are not necessarily tuned to face groups on their own. They generally are, you want to have multiples of them to be a challenge to a group. So that's something that would be looked at as well. So yeah, there is nothing specifically on our internal release schedule right now for that, but it is on the radar as something that we've got the material, and if we can find a good place for it and other stuff to go along with it, we'll probably see release at some point.
I'm going to call that book the Earthdawn Companion 2. But thank you, Joel, and thank you, Steve, for getting a hold of us on all those emails. By all means, if you want your questions answered eventually, email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And now we get to talk about T'Skrang.
Let us set sail,
absolutely,
as it were.
Down the river.
Down the river to the sea.
In a good way. T'Skrang are one of my favorite races to not only play, but to just invest in Earthdawn, because they are incredibly unique compared to other fantasy games. It definitely tells.
If I had to pick just one race as my favorite, the T'Skrang probably would be it.
They're in my top two because I love the Obsidian almost as. Yeah, they'd be my top two. It's one. It's 1 and 1A,
and they are definitely iconic as far as Earthdawn goes. Like, it is like Earthdawn, I don't think would be Earthdawn without the T'Skrang.
I agree.
You know, it is one of those exotic, for lack of a better term, races that really just,
it completes the
game. They're awesome.
It fleshes out so much more about
there is something just like captivating about them conceptually, and there certainly hadn't been anything like them previously, right? When you talk about like early 90s with Earthdawn's initial release, there had not, to my knowledge at least, been anything like the T'Skrang that had appeared before. You've had lizard folk that have appeared in games in the past, but in Dungeons and Dragons especially, again, talking about it as a response to that, lizard men were always kind of like bad guys or primitives or whatever. Yeah. And there was never like, at least in the fantasy realm, sci-fi realm is something different.
Totally.
But in the fantasy space, there hadn't been anything like the T'Skrang before. And really, because of that, I don't think there has been anything that has quite been like the T'Skrang since, because they appeared, and there they are, and they filled this niche that nobody was aware needed to be filled, exactly. And they filled it, and there's no need for anybody else to do so because they do it so well. Even when you get into when you get into more recent editions of Dungeons and Dragons, where you have the Dragonborn, right, which is the opportunity. The Dragonborn are not T'Skrang. No. Even in like 2nd edition D&D, where you had rules for playing monster races, the lizardmen
Sorials
are not T'Skrang.
No, I've played Sorials in D&D. So one of the few times I ever actually played D&D, because I got to pick the character I wanted to play.
The Sorials from Forgotten Realms are probably the closest, but they're still not.
No, because they couldn't talk. They only communicated through scent, and I actually had to read the novels to figure out what sense they used to communicate what their emotions were, and because they speak at a pitch higher than dogs can hear. So if you don't teach them the thieves can't sign language, you're never going to have them talk, which is why I like playing that character, because it gave a new dimension of role playing to everybody else in the party, which is like, I can't talk to you.
Yeah. So,
but that's it.
Sure. So the T'Skrang are just,
they were limited in a different way entirely because they couldn't talk. So to your point, they made them a more primitive type race and not as fleshed out.
Yeah. But the Sorials in Forgotten Realms, did not catch on and occupy any kind of significant pop culture niche in the Dungeons and Dragons space, the way that, say, for example, the Drow.
Yeah, they're not the Boba Fett dungeon.
Especially when you talk about them coming in and having your heroic Drow like Driss Do'Urden and some of the others. The Sorials, they appeared in a couple of novels, and they had some game stats that were created for them, but they never hugely caught on.
they didn't take off more than anybody else did either.
Yeah.
So none of the monsters really took off out of that monster.
And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Tiskrang arrived and you knew they arrived, which is actually very appropriate for the Tiskrang. And they very clearly like carved out their space. And, you know, again, it was like, how did we realize we were missing this? And now that we have it, we can't let it go.
Oh, and we can't live without it because they are one of the 8 name giver races, and they are just as fully fleshed out, if not more so, than the other 7. They're especially more fleshed out than humans, but they're just as equally fascinating and interesting because they have this dynamic going on where it's all about the family and they have this communal society. It's also matriarchal operated and run. So it's all, they call it a Nial. It means foundation. And they have their own little glossary of terms that they use, which are sometimes sentences boiled down to like 2 or 3 words. And then one word means occasionally a word, but their Nial, I always pronounce it Nial, means foundation, but that is their family. And so it's one and the same. So they can't live without their family, but they also have this need to yearn to be free and explore and, you know, sing and dance life.
They are outgoing, traditionally outgoing, loquacious, swashbuckly,
dancers.
Like swashbuckly, daring do, very zest. I mean, like multiple name giver races talk about the zest for life, but they each approach it sort of in different ways. Like the orcs approach the zest for life as in it's something that you need to grab and wrestle to the ground and defeat.
Yes.
And the Tiskrang kind of have, and the Windling zest for life is one that's like curiosity and just the fascination with new things and different experiences. Whereas the Tiskrang zest for life is very like life as a performance.
Yes.
Right. There's in one of the source books, it talks about how there's an expression said about the Tiskrang that all Tiskrang are born troubadours, you know, in that regard.
I'm going to borrow a quote from a musician, which is, "You may throw the party, I am the party." So
yeah, the Tiskrang have if you get into the information that's in the name givers, the name givers of Barsave or the name givers books, whether 1st edition or 3rd edition, or the Serpent River book to a certain extent as well.
Yes.
They are a fascinating and interesting and kind of different culture that is also still on the same hand, like recognizable in some respects. Like they are not as like ridiculously alien as you sometimes see in like some, like the way that Obsidian, for example, are in some regards kind of alien in terms of their mindset. But that they are like, again, they're a communal, that the Tiskrang of Barsave at least are a communal, semi-aquatic, rambunctious, loquacious, like sort of communal matriarchal society.
Yes.
That is just, they're awesome. Like we're just,
well, let's get into some details about what makes them awesome.
Like if you don't think that Tiskrang are awesome, what is wrong with you?
And stop playing our game.
You know, I mean, I can recognize people having a preference of other stuff over Tiskrang. I can recognize that, but the recognition of Tiskrang as something special and unique in Earthdawn is just...
You can have another favorite, but if Tiskrang's not in your top 4 because there's 8 races, then something is wrong with you.
Yeah. So
I'm just saying that.
So let's yeah.
I mean, you know, because to somebody else in a previous email asked, you know, is there interracial? How come there's no half races? Well, here's the first thing: these are lizard based, and they lay eggs.
Yes.
Outside their body, and these take 8 to 10 months to hatch. They have to be covered in a special mud, and after they do hatch, the males provide the milk to feed the hatchlings.
Much like the seahorse, where the initial sort of nursing of the young is handled by the males. There is, because of the communal society of Barsavian Tiskrang, setting aside the strange case of House Sirtis, which does its own thing.
And we won't talk about them.
Yeah, we're not going to get into the specifics of the different like great houses or anything, but
no, we're doing generalities.
But
today.
yeah, but most Tiskrang, the hatchery is a communal space, and that nobody really knows specifically whose eggs are whose, and so the entire community, to a certain extent, raises the young. The one sort of
So in this case, it does take a village.
yeah, the sort of the one exception being the what's called the chida or egg parent. Is the male who is bonded with the new hatchling and nurses them through their first few months, and that is the sort of strongest familial bond. Even though they will in most cases be blood related to it to an extent, but maybe not necessarily. Like it's the closest thing that a Tiskrang sees as a parent figure, and will often go to them for advice and things like that. When they are
for the rest of their lives,
for the rest of their lives. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where I get to bring in my favorite phrase from my favorite author. Family is an operational term, not a biological one. And the Tiskrang take that to the nth degree because they, all these eggs are huge, by the way. They're wider than a handspan. I mean,
yeah, they're good size. Now the eggs that for whatever reason do not quicken, do not fertilize,
the size of a softball,
are not wasted. As we learn in the Denizens of Barsave books, those eggs, once it has been determined that they are not going to hatch, that they are not going to grow, get delivered to the kitchens, and it's not seen as
cannibalism.
Basically that it didn't happen, and so it goes on, from there. Another interesting thing about Tiskrang is that while they are matriarchal, Tiskrang are not born with an obvious biological gender.
Yeah, they don't get to that until about the age of 12.
Yeah, until basically when they enter puberty, that is when it sort of gets revealed which they are, which also kind of comes into play in terms of like what their roles in society might be. That there is not that while maybe in the adult realm, there is like the Lahalas, the matriarchs of the clan and whatnot, versus, but there is not necessarily the like expectation of dividing the boys and girls and the cultural expectations that can go along with that, because that sort of thing is not revealed until they have already undergone. So there's sort of an equality that can be there. When it comes to their sort of cultural education and background and whatnot. And
because they started
perhaps more than any of the name givers, except perhaps Windlings or Obsidian, but even not to the same extent, Tiskrang are incredibly varied in their appearance.
Yes. So that I have a friend who is he's got pets that are iguanas and monitor lizards and so forth. And so every time we talked about it to Tiskrang, he wanted to know what they were based on as far as what real life living lizards we have on Earth right now, what color patterns they had. And you think of lizards, naturally you go to the color green, but we've got other examples.
Yeah, I would say, so one, Tiskrang are not really based on any real world lizards.
No.
At least not surviving real world lizards. I would say the closest things that Tiskrang are modeled after are actually some of the dinosaurs. And forgive me, dinosaur nerds, if I am using the wrong terms or whatever, but I think the hadrosaurs are the ones that the duck-billed or frilled dinosaurs. I think they're sort of collectively called hadrosaurs. That those are sort of, I think, physically what the Tiskrang are sort of most modeled after. But when it comes to their actual appearance, I think of them more along the lines of amphibians like tree frogs and stuff like that.
Yes.
As opposed to more traditional lizards that you're going to see. Like
they're not a
don't necessarily
lizard.
See them being like
scaly.
super scaly. Well,
on occasion,
bright colors, like potentially bright colors and spots and patterns and maybe
skin.
Sort of like stripy kind of stuff.
Yes.
Is all
splotchy and patchy. Yeah.
As a possibility that you would see maybe similar colorings within a given family or extended family, but within Tiskrang as a whole, you can, flip open a Google image search for like Brazilian tree frogs, and there you go.
Yeah, just frogs in general, go. Because they come in blues and greens and purples and reds, and just you name it, go. Not a lot yellow.
And while they are traditionally also depicted with fins or frills or something like that on their head, that is not necessarily the case either. You could make an argument for maybe some Tiskrang that have a bit more of like, say, maybe like a turtley kind of look about them.
Yeah, just as a subspecies.
Because we are dealing with a completely fictional fantasy race.
Yeah, the sky's the limit.
The sky is the limit.
Or at the bottom of the ocean.
The other thing about Tiskrang that we amazingly have not mentioned after 20 minutes of this.
Yeah.
Are their tails.
I was going to get there eventually because that is an awesome, awesome thing. I love playing I love playing races in other games where you've got an extra appendage that you get to do something with. The Vorox and Fading Suns are 4 arms and 2 legs. I love playing mutants in Marvel where maybe I have an extra appendage as well. So the tail attack absolutely feeds my need for that in Earthdawn.
And that is something that, again, if you go and you look at the write-ups in the Name Givers books, the tail is a integral aspect of Tiskrang communication and culture. Because they all have them, and so it consequently has arisen.
Yeah.
No, Tiskrang are phenomenal. Like they really are just amazing.
Well, yeah, because going back to some childhood development as well, they enter school at 3 years old. They get out of school at about 12, which also coincides with their name choosing ceremony, the Kaisa, where they get
their puberty.
They take on their second name. And usually that's 9 times out of 10. They honor their nurturing parent.
Their Chida.
The Chida.
Yep.
They honor that person by taking on their name. Not always, but a lot of the times. So you get to create these wonderful, intricately long names for your Tiskrang character. That just are awesome to go with. They also arrange any of their village huts into like a diamond-shaped pattern. They love commerce almost as much as the dwarves do. So they have this whole riverboat entrepreneurial ship going on.
Yeah.
And if the Niall, the family, has its own riverboat, any spoils or any profit they make all come back and are shared communally. So it's socialism to the nth degree. And then if it's owned by a house, if the riverboat's owned by a house, then that profit goes back just to the house. So it's a different tier setup on how commerce is done. Yeah. So there's all kinds of role-playing aspects you can get into on those.
I mean, basically, like, you've got swashbuckly sentient bipedal dinosaurs riding magically powered, like, steam engine riverboats along the waterways of Barsave. What's not to like? Again, it comes back to if you don't think Tiskrang are awesome, I question your judgment.
I question you as a human. And then there's the offshoot of Tiskrang that actually have the
wing flaps,
extra membrane, the kitsulami.
Yep, the kastulami.
So, and they're also bigger thrill seekers. They can swim. They like to swim.
They are less aquatic and more pteranodon. Yeah. Like flying squirrel, pteranodon, like gliders. There is a house of them that has sprung up in the Thrall Mountains.
Yes.
And there are some indications perhaps that that particular strain of Tiskrang was perhaps magically suppressed in some way during the Scourge in order to keep them from all going mad, and then they've sort of been able to return.
Yeah.
Although, actually, if we talk about it, the Tiskrang, many of them did not go through the Scourge the same way that the other name givers did.
Yes, this is a huge part of their history.
A lot of them, basically underwent a magical ritual that they sort of build protections and so forth with their river villages the way that other name givers did. But a lot of them, understanding culturally that they probably would not have been able to do well in the confined environment of a care, underwent powerful magical ritual that effectively put them all into hibernation. This raises some interesting questions with regards to, okay, did they age during that time and stuff like that? We're sort of in the default setting. We're far enough after the Scourge that I don't think that's maybe a question so much, because Tiskrang aren't especially long lived. And so aside from the racial memories of the Lahalas, there are probably not many Tiskrang that actually remember those days so much anymore.
And even if the Lahalas do, they are under no obligation to tell you.
Right. It just there's so much that is cool and interesting and fascinating and exciting about Tiskrang. And I've mentioned here before that if something ever were to happen to my Troll Neithermancer in our online game, yes, I would probably roll out a Tiskrang of some sort as my next character.
I'm currently playing a Tiskrang Scout in 4th edition under my Game Master because I just absolutely love Tiskrang. I have 2 Tiskrang characters and 2 Obsidian characters. So like I said, I pretty much love them equally. Those are my absolute 2 favorite races because they are unique to the nth degree to Earthdawn.
My online handles Metaxas and Lore Merchant. The Lore Merchant is actually Metaxas. It's the same character, but yes, but those are all in homage to a significant NPC from my first long-term Earthdawn game, who was a Tiskrang, who operated out of Bartertown, but was basically sort of like a, what's her name from Parlength?
Oh, good gravy.
You know who I mean.
I do. Vartigal.
Her name begins with Vartigal. Yes.
Vartigal's Lore Exchange. Yes.
sort of a Vartigal type character, although less of a was also acted something of an independent, like, intelligence agent and whatnot. As well. So no, that's where that comes from, and he was a Tiskrang and is, that representation. So right from the beginning.
There you are.
Okay. Also, so we've talked a lot about, sorry, you were going to say?
I was going to say a couple of the things that Tiskrangs are also known for that I always try to put in when my characters come across a village on the river or anything along those lines is the Tiskrang spiced fish.
Yep.
Always need to make a note of that. And their clinger rope or their rope of incomparable strength, because the Tiskrang have 50 different names for the 50 different reeds of grass that grow along the Serpent River in all of its various places. And they are the best at weaving rope, making baskets that are waterproof. And they have actually been the ones to make paper that is the preferred paper of magicians to write their grimoires on.
So yeah, it's really notable if you take a look at the Tiskrang write-ups in the source books.
Yes. How
well considered the Tiskrang are as a culture, the Barsavian Tiskrang at least as a culture, in terms of where they live and how that influences them and the things that they are good at and focused on. And much like some of the other aspects, I mean, kind of like, like the Tiskrang, I think right from the very beginning in the core book, had a very like strong impact and aesthetic that was so remarkable. And we had talked about when we discussed dwarves, like how the Earthdawn dwarf didn't really take shape until later on.
Yes.
Whereas the Tiskrang development, like, it existed there from the beginning, and that was only refined and enhanced by its later development. That there was not a lot of work that needed to be done, and it was just adding depth yes, in a sense that did not happen quite the same way with dwarves.
And I think even I heard a podcast a few weeks ago, where even Lou Prosperi, the Jack Kirby of Earthdawn, said that the Serpent River is one of the most perfect source books ever written for Earthdawn. And that says a lot.
Yeah, certainly it is one of the Serpent River source book is a fantastic source book for so many reasons. And I would certainly put it up there in terms of, like, not only like best source books for Earthdawn, but probably one of the best broadly useful RPG source books for any game line, certainly fantasy game lines.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't know about them all, but I have been exposed to a lot of different games and a lot of different lines. And just the work that they did, Serpent River and the Thrall Source book, those are a 1-2 punch of phenomenal setting design and development.
Leads to since we've covered dwarves earlier, and we noticed we've had made mention that they are the essential founders of most of society in Barsave, that they have their own source book for Thrall, but the Serpent River has its secondary source book, and as you said, 1-2 punch. It just goes to show how integral the Tiskrang are in helping form, maintain, and influence society as a whole, because they're vastly in charge of the river travel.
Yeah, but in a very different way than the dwarves are.
Agreed. They're not
right. Like they are critical and a very significant part of what makes Barsave and the way that broader provincial culture operates, but in a very different way from the dwarves.
Yeah, the dwarves created the government, the rules, the laws, and kind of how things operate. But so they're the bones. They're the structure of all of Barsave. The Tiskrang and the riverboats and the rivers are the blood that pumps through it and makes it all work.
In some respects, certainly.
So that's we cannot clearly gush enough about the Tiskrang and their importance, their absolute badassery, if I can use the term for that, and their integral nature into Earthdawn. So if you've not played a Tiskrang character, go play one.
Yeah, and the Tiskrang, like, to briefly talk, like, we haven't briefly talked numbers here. The Tiskrang get minor bonuses to a couple of different things.
Yes.
They get off of the baselines, they get a 1-point bonus to dexterity, they get a 1-point bonus to toughness, and they get a 1-point bonus to charisma. They do not get any penalties.
Yeah, they're a badass race.
So they don't have the karma that a human does, who has 10s across the board. But because of their dex and toughness bonuses, they make, and then a charisma bonus, like, they are swordmasters.
Yes, the archetypal swordmaster.
Right? Like, swordmasters and to a slightly lesser, Tiskrang swordmaster is such an iconic Earthdawn image.
Oh, yes.
But they are well suited to anything, really, that you might want to do with them mechanically. There are no shortcomings that you need to overcome with them in terms of being able to do what you want to do. They don't get the karma that the human does. They don't have quite that degree, but everything else is
a plus.
Anything that you want to do. Yeah. Anything that you want to do with the Tiskrang, you can certainly make them a worthwhile contributor.
Yeah. And I remember in first edition, I think the only thing they couldn't play was a Beastmaster. I think because they were considered bestial.
They couldn't be a cavalryman either by default, but I think there was a...
Right, that was it. I had that backwards. They couldn't be a cavalryman because they couldn't ride a beast. They
couldn't... Like, I don't think they could be beastmasters or cavalrymen.
Yeah,
but there was in the Serpent River book, I think there was... they might not have actually been cavalrymen, but there were Tiskrang cavalry that rode sort of like seahorses, basically.
Yes.
Or river steeds of a sort.
Yeah.
And I even seem to recall...
There's a picture of one of those in there somewhere.
Weren't there... Might have been... Yeah, there's a picture in the Serpent River book. Yeah. But I'm thinking now that wasn't it possible... Like, wasn't there a detachment of Kistulami Tiskrang that were Griffin riders for the Therans?
I want to say so, but it's been a while since I boned up on those stories.
Which meant they almost certainly would have had to have been cavalrymen in order to pull that off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway.
But if you ever find, since I recorded a legend once upon a time that absolutely nobody has written an email on at all, my favorite legend out of the Legends of Earthdawn book is Baby Anointed in Sand.
Anointed in Sand.
Oh, that one makes me cry every time.
Yeah, so that's a good one.
That of all the 30 stories in there, that one is my absolute favorite. I can't quote it, but it's fantastic. I will record that and tack it on the end of a podcast soon. Not this one.
At some point. Not this one.
An hour and 15 in. So yeah. But seriously, as I said, we cannot gush enough about Tiskrang because they're just flipping badass. So
yeah. So I think with that, we will
wrap it up.
What's the Shustal?
Yes, Shustal. No more need be said.
That's the Tiskrang word. No more need be said.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we will wrap it up there for another episode of the Earthdawn Survival Guide. Thank you all for coming along with us.
Totally.
We certainly appreciate your attention as we continue this exploration of this fantastic world and the game. Feel free,
and as we answered
questions, and if you have questions of your own or you want to gush about Tiskrang, you can send us emails, edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Because we will not accept hate mail into Tiskrang. It will not be read it will not be read at all. It will not. Promise you right now. Otherwise, folks, it's time for you to go make your own legend. Shustal.